Welcome everyone to DRJ's webinar series. I'm Bob Arnold, President here at DRJ. We thank you for your attendance today and we hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. Everyone's phone has been muted and we ask you to utilize the question panel you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen. Our speakers today will attempt to answer as many of these as possible at the end of the webinar. Today's sponsor is MetricStream. Today's topic is integrating cybersecurity into business continuity strategies to achieve organizational resilience. Our speakers today are Ian Clark and Yo Delmar. Ian has been a member of Business Continuity Institute since 1996 and elevated to Fellow of the Institute in 1998. He was an elected director of the BCI from December 2002 until December of 2006, and during his tenure held positions on the Executive Management Board of the Institute and as chair of the Standards and Compliance Committee. He has supplied consultancy services in many business sectors at all levels within organizations. He is the principals of Forethought Associates, dedicated to assisting organizations achieve high levels of resilience and business continuity management capability through active partnerships at strategic, operational, and tactical levels. Yo Delmar is the Vice President of GRC Solutions at MetricStream. Delmar has over 30 years of experience in information technology management with a focus on government risk and compliance over the past 10 years. Yo is responsible for MetricStream's customer program for over 300 companies worldwide and drives MetricStream's GRC Journey program, which provides expertise in helping companies implement strategies and programs for GRC solutions that add strategic value while delivering dramatic cost savings. With no further introductions, I'd like to welcome and turn the mic over to Ian.
Hi, thank you very much, Bob, and welcome to all the participants in this webinar. And please, as Bob said, if you do have any questions, use the chat, and both Yo and myself will attempt to answer your questions. Diving straight in. What, in fact, we're going to be looking at today is, as it says, but looking at the trends driving integration in organizational resilience, looking at the approaches which are employed in achieving business continuity management and cybersecurity systems, trying to encourage the utilization of common terminology, and briefly touching on challenges to collaboration, which is essential, looking at the critical competencies and how we can break the barriers. And hopefully at the end of it, we'll have enough time to get final conclusions and a question and answer session which will be interactive. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce the subject by the latest detail from the Business Continuity Institution's Horizon Scan, which indicates the top 10 threats to business. And if it doesn't surprise many people, cyber attack sits right there at the top, and 43% of the respondents indicated they're extremely concerned, and 39% are concerned. So you can actually say that this is the top threat. Unplanned IT and telecommunications outages, data breach are all within the top 10, and the security incident comes right in there. So positioning ourselves, the business continuity is very, very aware that cybersecurity is an extremely important portion of it. And I'm now going to hand over to Yo for a look at the trends driving the integration.
Thanks, Ian. As many of you know, there are many trends now that are affecting this convergence of business continuity, disaster recovery, risk management, and cybersecurity. And we've tried to summarize them into these 5, which we believe are most germane to the topic. The first is globalization. There's just an explosion of data, rules, policies, regs, and risks as organizations extend their business model across the globe into these virtual supply chains. And as a result, management at the board level used to be very much something that was looked at the CIO level, but now increasingly at the operas level and the leadership team level and at board level. There's a demand now for a 360-degree view of risk. Management wants to understand the size, scale, and scope of risks and see what the plan is to contain them. At the same time, we see tolerance time shrinking. It used to be hours, days, weeks for return to operations for some processes. Now, that tolerance time has shrunk to nanoseconds. Expectations are high. The customer is always on 24/7. Our customers, suppliers, third parties are connected in a mobile, social, and digital world. And this requires an incredible amount of coordination across all of these teams and reaching out into first responders, reaching out into government agencies, and so forth. And it's a set of processes that we have yet to weave together in a very smooth fabric. And that's really the big challenge that we're facing right now as we talk about integrated resilience. And the fact that these impacts can cascade very quickly, something that really has one root cause or one incident or event can affect others. There can be a domino effect, and something that starts out very small, a component of our networks or processes that looks like it's too small to fail, can actually have an effect across multiple stakeholders. And then on the next slide, we're looking at some of the technologies that are driving integrated resilience. We're looking at complexity in terms of information security threats alone. The complexity and the number of moving parts in virtual and social and digital systems through third-party suppliers, through cloud service suppliers, and so on, is increasing the number of moving parts, which means that the potential for a threat weaving through those layers of the architecture increases exponentially, and we call that the threat surface, and that is growing as we get more interconnected. And we are becoming more interconnected. We are blurring the boundary between work and private smartphones and devices. We have a supplier and vendor ecosystem that often reaches right into our companies. Our customers and third parties have access to information that they didn't have access to even 5 years ago. And the fact that critical data is now being moved en masse to the cloud for scalability and efficiency returns is also quite worrisome, because we often don't have the visibility or control into what is happening with our data. On top of that, we have social media that can explode a situation beyond what we might have previously experienced. Social media can be a double-edged sword. It can be very helpful in terms of reporting incidents or getting the word out, but it can also cause a situation that might have been contained to go viral. And this is really a result of the mobility of the workforce, the fact that we are all always on, and we have devices at our fingertips almost 24/7.
Thanks, Yo. And looking at what we're looking at, resilience is a goal, which is what we're all striving for. And business resilience is an area whereby we've got to look at taking the best portions and combining the strengths of the information and cybersecurity, who are really there to look after the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. This is basic square one of that data. The business continuity looks at the impacts of disruptive events and looks at the cumulative impact over time. And it is from business continuity that we're able to set this recovery points and recovery times per business process. Risk management, they look at the two-dimensional impact of a risk event and the probability of occurrence, and estimate the magnitude. And it's one thing that I've always advocated right from day one, is that we combine the business continuity management approach and the risk management approach will exponentially increase the resilience of a business organization. And it's useless to have the resilience, but if the event does occur, you have to have an adequate and effective crisis management who looks after the communication, the reputation, and the notifications necessary to keep the business in stream.
But at the same time, integration is very challenging. We've got security teams, continuity teams, all trying to manage a different portfolio of threat and risk with a different type of nomenclature and really heritage and discipline around developing risk models and developing remediation plans. We have different policies and procedures that may be conflicting at the corporate or local level, and many different regulations that may require different levels of specificity. So for companies and organizations that work globally with multiple business units and have processes that are defined at different levels of granularity, this can be a real challenge because reporting comes from different continuous monitoring systems all over the world, from supplier systems, even if you aren't operating globally, or from other customer systems. And it's very hard to get a clear picture of what's going on and in a model that everyone agrees to. So we're really trying to get all of this disparate reporting and view of risk into a cohesive framework that everyone can understand. And so Ian's going to take us through a lot of the standards that are in place right now. And for those security folks out there, we'll see these standards and recognize them, but we'll also understand that BCM as a discipline has always taken technology systems and security systems under its umbrella. And now more than ever, it's so critical to get this right. So over to Ian, and he'll walk us through the BCM program and some of the standards that support the integration of cyber with resilience.
Yeah, thanks, Yo. And I think everybody is well aware that management standards coming out from ISO are now conforming to the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, and I don't make any apology just by bringing it up that it is a continuous loop cycle, because what we are trying to do is we're trying to get integration and quality and more efficient, but more importantly, effective control of the operational capability of the business. And just taking into account that the business impact and risk assessment has been an integral component of business continuity management since I joined the BCI way back in the 1990s. And even before then, business impact was always a requirement for disaster recovery. So we're looking at bringing it all together, looking at how we can bring it into a business continuity strategy, establish, implement, exercising and rehearsals. Note the terminology that I use here. We don't use test, because test is an auditor's favorite, because in a test you have a pass or a fail. Exercising and rehearsals is far more human friendly, I think is the best way to describe it. But moving on to just discussing a few of the standards. Now, I make no apology for taking the guidance standards, because these are actually far more explicit in defining it. 22313 is the guidance standard, whereas ISO 22301 is the requirements against which an organization can be audited. But it's important to look at the business continuity management system. Right at the bottom of that clause 8.2.1, it states categorically it is also important to understand the interrelationships and resource requirements of activities that support products and services and the threats. And that is something which is going to be a thread throughout this quick review of all the standards. And if we look at ISO 27001, look back at the history, it originated way back in 1995 with a British standard, BS 7799. And the Business Continuity Institute was an integral part of framing the standard. And that is why business continuity has always been a component part of the information security and hence cybersecurity. But the one critical thing that we have to recognize is that in A1414, it states that there is a single framework of business continuity plans, and the best place where business continuity plans can be implemented and maintained, I maintain, is within the business continuity. The reasons for my maintaining this will become apparent later on. And looking at the guidance standard of ISO 27001, it states it quite categorically there. Clause 5.2, it states that management objectives may be used as input to define the preliminary information security management system scope, include the requirement for facilitating business continuity and disaster recovery. So here we have the guidance standards saying that we should be integrating, we should be talking to each other. And these are the little problems that we've had to come across. And looking at it, how do we define the critical business areas? How do we define the critical organization? What organizational areas provide the business, and with what and the focus? Looking at the third-party relationship and agreements, what we have here is an indication that the information security should be looking at those areas. But not only that, in subsection H, it says business continuity requirements. What are the critical business processes? How do you define what are the critical business processes? Or, in a little bit more modern terminology, what are the time-sensitive business processes which are required to provide the necessary customer service and of its organizations, products and services? How long can the organization tolerate interruptions to critical business processes is something which we've all become very, very familiar with, and it's been around ever since, well, what was it? The computers that we ran on were actually steam powered. So if we look at the ISO 22301, which is the business continuity management standard, it states quite categorically in the business impact analysis statement, it states, shall establish, implement and maintain a formal and documented evaluation processing. All the way down, and it's, quote, business impact analysis identifies activities that support the provision of products and services, assessing the impacts over time, setting prioritized timeframes for resuming, and identifying dependencies and the supporting resources, including suppliers, outsource, and relevant interested parties. Within those relevant interested parties is the all-important ICT capability, information, communications, and technology capability, which is essential for providing the confidentiality, integrity, and the availability of the data, which the applications turn into information for the business to operate effectively. The business impact analysis is subject to a new standard which is going to be coming out very, very shortly. It's intended in around about Q3 of this year, which will be 22317. And in there, it defines that when you've got all your prerequisites, you've got your scope, you've got your roles, you've got your commitment, and you've got your resources, you can then set up the business impact analysis. And it starts from the top down, from product and service prioritization, looking at the processes which are necessary to be effectively in operation to provide the products and services continuity of supply, the activities that there are that support those processes, and the supporting activities which are all the underlying services, exactly the same way as we have a requirement for electricity, we have a requirement for power, we have a requirement for water, we have that essential requirement for ICT services. Once we've got that, it's analyzed, consolidated, but the important step that we have now is that it goes for the top management to endorse that the analysis is accurate to enable us to proceed. And if we haven't covered all the bases, round the circle we will go again and again until eventually it generates a set of requirements which then goes into ISO 22301 for the business continuity strategy. And it's there that it's developed. Now there's that always the area, where does information security, cybersecurity come in? Information security analysis provide management with a starting point. Is it correct? Is it identified and documented conditions for the implementation? Correct. Provide a clear and well-established understanding of the organization's facilities? Must be correct. So all those items that there are in there are fed in at the same time. One critical area where there is a difference is that it's predicated that you're conducting a risk assessment. It's not a business impact. Risk assessment comes first. So in there, you have the description of the risk assessment methodologies. Well, the risk assessment methodology is well documented in ISO 31000. And that is the one area that we have to look at. How do you conduct a risk assessment? You look at the risk, and once it's been done, is the risk assessment satisfactory? If it's not satisfactory, round it goes again. You then look at risk treatment. And treatments are subtly different to impact statements. You have to look at modification, retention, avoidance, and risk sharing. And the common way of risk sharing is to outsource or send a process to another area. The one misconception that we do have, which is quite common, and I've found it in many of the organizations I've worked with, is that a lot of organizations think that by outsourcing a process, you're outsourcing the risk as well. No, that risk remains with the organization because it is your process. All that you've done is you've outsourced the activities, and that by outsourcing an activity into information security requirements adds another layer of risk of compromise of that information. Once you've determined all that, look at your residual risks and say, have I got satisfactory treatment of all risks? Yes. It's exactly the same process the business continuity within the business impact analysis and risk analysis takes into account. So business continuity, the ISO 22301, takes this approach as an additional consideration.
Right. Thanks, Ian. And all of you who come from a security background or an IT background appreciate that there has been a convergence in terminology and approaches for risk management in general, that we've seen some alignment, let's say, between 36,000, 27,005, COSO, NIST, etc. But that still leaves us with a huge gap and a rapidly evolving environment in cyber in particular. So, you know, we know that different risk approaches come up with different results. Some individuals, some business units may be using frequency times severity times velocity, for example, to measure risk or to assess risk. Others might be using likelihood times impact. Others might be focusing more on threat or vulnerability pairing. Some may be using the FAIR approach, factor analysis for information risk, which allows us to take quantitative and qualitative factors and map them. Cybersecurity people may be looking at threat vectors and look at actors and their ability to access regulated or sensitive assets. They may be looking at their motivation or skill level, etc. So there are many different ways to conduct a risk assessment and many different factors that come into play. But one of the biggest gaps that we have to contend with in terms of the way that business continuity and DR programs are approaching risk management and the way that information security is that information security is tending to look more at continuous monitoring, and that's becoming a requirement through NIST for those of you who follow that standard. So you've necessarily got a difference in approach. One is a snapshot approach, the other is really striving towards continuous monitoring. Now, on top of that, we've got new approaches that are really going to be turning risk management on its head. And one of these approaches is called the kill chain, and some of you may have been introduced to this concept. It actually is a military term that is a phase-based model. It describes stages of an attack, and it helps inform people of ways to prevent such attacks. And Lockheed Martin took this over a few years ago and created the cyber kill chain, where the phases are more like are more about reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation. And the idea is that the earlier in the cyber kill chain that you can detect an attack, the better it is. The least damage will be done if you can detect an attacker, say, in their reconnaissance phase. So what we're seeing now is a shift where companies are assessing their ability to be able to monitor and detect and to contain an attack at an earlier stage of execution. And this requires a different perspective. It means that cyber analysts are now starting to look outside in, and they're trying to be proactive and look at what's our capability, what's our muscle at each stage of this kill chain to be able to deal with an incident. And that is very similar to what BCDR people have been doing for decades. It's quite interesting that now BCDR people and cyber people can sit down around a table and start to think about threats in a common nomenclature. We have a long way to go in terms of getting the right terminology, the taxonomy, and the language that we all understand and adhere to, but at least we have a perspective that is beginning to be much more similar. Over to you, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Jo. And if we look at it, there are two distinct differences within the approach which is employed between information security management and business continuity in the way in which we deal with the processes. We have a jam. I do apologize, because we'll go from current. Somebody has altered the slide. But if one looks at it from that viewpoint, the risk management approach, it looks at the likelihood, runs it through a filter to determine the impact, then from the impact determine your controls and plans. But also the business continuity looks at the impacts first, then looks at the dependencies, then says what threats can impact it, then looks at the controls and plans. So if we look at the two differences, that the information risk management approach looks at protection against a specific threat, which may miss the high impact and low probability events, whereas business continuity looks at the recovery of business, which may miss specific risk responses. And that leads on to the Two Nations speech, which came up from Winston Churchill, and it's looking at the technology. We are two processes divided by a common language. So how can we actually achieve the terminology? Now let's look at ISO 22301. Business continuity defined there is the capability of an organization. But more importantly is the subsection beneath it, which says an event, which is an occurrence or a change of particular set of circumstances. Now, in business continuity terminology, we normally prefix that with the word disruptive. It's a disruptive event because it is disrupting our capability of the organization to continue. An incident is the latent, which is such a situation that could lead to disruption, loss, or emergency. That is the incident which is detected. And my viewpoint on there is that the incident should be a trigger to give a heads up to business continuity. A new term which a lot of people may have missed is this one, which is MBCO, which is the minimum business continuity objective, which is the minimum level of services and products. We've still got the MAO, and we've actually taken the two and combined it with the one which was maximum tolerable period of disruption, MTPD. Combined the two together, and I think it was because it was raising a bit too many issues with people saying, isn't MTPD same as MAO? Quite frankly, yes. But if we skip down the organizational resilience, this is something which is coming to the fore, and it's becoming very, very apparent that we're talking about organizational resilience, but we're not talking about organizational resilience in the same way. And if we can just put a line in the sand here that says the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to incremental change. Now this says that your risk management approach is not going to be very, very easy to adapt, whereas your business continuity approach can cater for adaptation, but it's rather weak in terms of the anticipation. Combine the two together and we will be there. The resources within our ISO 22301 states there, all assets, full stop, people, skills, information technology, premises, supplies, information, whether electronic or not, that an organization has to have available when needed in order to operate, which then brings us down onto the age-old question, what is meant by RTO? And RTO is defined quite concisely, that it's the period of time following an incident within which the product or services must be resumed, activity must be resumed, and resources must be recovered. And this leads us on to the challenge. The challenge there, which says in 22313, setting recovery time objectives for ICT systems that enable prioritized activities to be resumed within their RTOs. What does it say? ICT systems. But ICT systems also need the data to assemble into information. So this is the one key issue which is stating categorically that business continuity practitioners ignore information security at their peril, because if we don't satisfy that requirement, you are not going to get the ISO 22301 certification. Which leads us into what I call the Backwater Standard. ISO 27031, which is ICT readiness for business continuity. It brings in a new mnemonic, IRBC, and it says there in the introduction, and it's highlighted, it is critical to develop and implement a readiness plan for the ICT services to help ensure business continuity. This was almost like the road to Damascus moment, whereby business continuity practitioners, IT disaster recovery, ICT service continuity people had all got to sit up and take notice that the information and the CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that information was critical to ensure that the ICT services could meet their requirements. And it's one which is very, very, very difficult to get through. Having worked with organizations, they will say that recovery, the RTO of an ICT service starts when they decide to invoke, because invocation of the service continuity, disaster recovery, etc., indicates cost dollars. The business is totally ignorant of that. Their RTO starts when the disaster event occurs. How do we cater for the detection and invocation decision time is something that for many, many years there has been an argument across the table between the ICT service continuity people and business continuity. It was addressed in ITIL, it was addressed in ISO 20000 by saying that ICT service continuity and business continuity are interconnected because they are the window, and those people must handshake to ensure that all aspects of the business are going to be able to continue. So it says there in ISO 27031, Annex A, from a business continuity perspective, there is an RTO per product, service, or activity, and that this RTO starts from the point at which the disruption occurs. And it acknowledges there might be a number of ICT services. So, to categorize, it says the ICT service RTO should be less than the business continuity, taking into account the detection and decision-making time and the user acceptance testing time. And sometimes it's also the data audit time as well. And it says there in the caveat at the end of it, unless the business continuity product, service, or activity can be supported without ICT services, for example, using manual procedures or known workarounds.
Thanks, Ian. And so now that we've got an idea of how the standards themselves are recognizing that at the event, once we've had an event, that's where we have to all sort of move into action together as a team. Practically, what is it that we have to do in our organizations to get these teams working in an integrated way? So what we've done here is brought out 5 critical competencies that we believe are most important if you are going to be spearheading this kind of change in an organization. And in many of our organizations, we really think about this as being you all being secret agents of change, because that's really what it's all about. There are things that you have to do to influence culture and get support from executives to create a culture of risk, to align policies and procedures and roles with thresholds and appetites, to continue to work on this huge problem of establishing a common language, and then working to extend models and rationalize models so that you can gain an enterprise view of risk out into your supplier and customer and third-party environments. And then orchestrating change, making sure that, as many people know, our environments, our infrastructure, our processes, the companies that we work with, and our customer and supplier community is constantly changing. It's a highly dynamic environment. So it's how do we build a community where we're all continuing to build up these strengths and to continuously improve. So the first step is all about culture. So this should really be established as a formal program, and you can go to your chief risk officer or leadership team members who have responsibility for risk, for audit, for corporate compliance, for operational risk, and help to build a proactive decision-making team across crisis management, business continuity, DR, risk, and security and cyber teams. All of this is really predicated on the notion that you've got well-defined appetites that are translated into tolerances through a strong BIA, and that people are really clear on what their goals are and what their performance SLAs are. So this is all about supporting a dialogue, keeping track of metrics, reflecting back performance to these teams, this very variety of stakeholders that all have an interest in 360-degree risk. So it's very, very important here to get appetites and then tie them not only to metrics, but also through to policies. So here we're driving behavior into the operational fabric of the organization. We're saying it's not only important to set up policies, but also to have those policies reflected in procedures and to continue to test, to continue to run exercises and scenarios and so on, to understand where those potential conflicts are in procedures and roles, to make sure that there's the right level of empowerment. So somebody at a very remote location, if there's an event, has actually the power to make the decision that has to be made within the right period of time to make sure that we've minimized the impact. So it really is about getting the right subject matter experts involved and making sure that these empowerment factors are driven into role descriptions and into performance as well. And the third critical core competency is all about the language. And we've talked about the importance of establishing a common terminology. This is a horrendous challenge. Each of the different groups that you work with have different terms, different taxonomies that they use. Some groups may define risk in terms of having a very clear business impact, like a fine or a loss of revenue, for example, whereas a security team may talk about security risks that operational risk people may say, hey, that's not a risk, that's a vulnerability, or that's a control failure, or that's really a threat. It's so important to understand what the risk model is, what the threat model is, and provide a context. You know, what process are we talking about? What assets are in scope? What location? What people are in scope with this particular process? And then align that with monitoring systems across IT security and other third parties who also may have a different set of taxonomies that they use for, say, monitoring vulnerability. You know, a lot of network scanners, for example, or system information and event monitoring systems and security SIM systems may have a different set of terms that they use. to describe what are commonly viewed as risks or incidents or events from an IT perspective. So getting that whole end-to-end process sorted and streamlined is extremely important as well, so that as these teams come together, they're able to really jump into action, and they know what their roles are, and they can actually respond to incidents in a meaningful and efficient way. And one of the ways that we've seen customers really get high value from getting this integration off the ground is when they start to manage issues and incidents as a portfolio. Because there's nothing that brings people together from these different silos more quickly than being able to look at an issue and then start to discuss how a preventative or proactive capability has to be deployed. This is all about remediation investments, making sure the right remediation is applied at the right stage in the process. So this is a very important working group to set up. It's important to use technology to coordinate across these groups to get well-established workflows in place and make people aware of what their responsibilities are and to conduct exercises so that it's really sort of built in second nature. And then the fifth critical competency really has to do with orchestration. So this is again, a concept of change management. Your organization will be constantly changing and moving up the maturity curve. You'll have to really be quite diligent to spot opportunities to gain efficiency. You can identify synergies and look at funding for those initiatives and look at the value and the reduced costs that may be coming with a more streamlined process. It's very important to get certification programs in play and to build a community who are dedicated to this vision of convergence and integration across these teams. So it's important to mature this program in stages to understand what the appetite for your organization is in terms of change, to continuously improve, and to constantly reinforce this notion of moving to a more real-time, continuous monitoring intelligence of your external and internal environment.
And following on from what Jo's been saying, is that it's looking at the Plan, Do, Check, Act structure and bringing it into line that we are going to be integrating the business continuity Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle with the ICT Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. And it's beautifully illustrated in the ISO 27031, and each of those green arrows that there are between the understanding, the determination, the developing, and the exercising in there, they are saying talk to each other, never mind the silos, talk to one another directly, face to face, across a table, thrash it out so that when we do start to build our own strategies and our own responses and our own recovery, when we come to put it all into an incident management, a crisis management, or a disruptive event management program, we all are talking the same language, we've all got the same priorities ready-made and agreed. And of course, sometimes there will be a few barriers. If you look at it, the desired outcomes are collaborative analysis techniques in consolidating information, because not only looking at it, the risk is not about threats and impacts, etc. Risk has the other side of the coin, which says opportunities. Now, if we've got a threat which generates an opportunity, we've got to be responsive enough that we can change the way in which we can utilize the benefits from that, and it means that we've got to be able to maintain collaboration and communication all over. But if we can confirm the impact over time at all levels, we can confirm our resource dependencies, consolidate the recourse requirements, and confirmation of the interdependencies, those will be far stronger as input into the business continuity, the IRBC, and the cybersecurity, because cybersecurity uses a risk management from the bottom up. Business continuity looks at it from the top down. IRBC, the ICT service continuity people, they're grateful for any input whatsoever. And really, to resolve that RTO imbalance, to achieve the deliverable MBCO, we have got to agree to extend the business continuity defined RTO by manual processes, known workarounds, or, and here's the one, seek approval to enhance the ICT asset recovery or the cybersecurity by acquisition of improved technology. By combining it, we've got a ready-made business case available to present to top management. How can you do that? You can minimize business processes, activities exposure, implementing cellular processes, i.e. being able at the time of incident to ring fence certain applications to prevent further intrusion. Look at the activity, look at your data infrastructure, putting in separate gates, cells. But not only that, more importantly, incorporate business continuity management as a contributor into the change and release management process across all the environment. And looking at it, you can develop your ICT strategy, including your cybersecurity, in line with the business. We can negotiate service levels and costs to provide ICT continuity so that business is fully aware and you can plan with confidence. ICT can assure business by regular testing, and information security can focus on enhanced detection and isolation techniques. It's one thing being able to contain it, but you've got to detect it first. Develop a proactive rather than a reactive. Let's actually go out there and utilize what the military decides as ISTAR. Look at your intelligence, surveillance, target acquisition. If you can get it before it breaches the firewall, brilliant. An organizational strategy should be determined to take the appropriate strategy options. Stabilize, continuity, resuming, recovering prioritized activities within the shortest possible time with a contained disruption to the normal business. Mitigation, managing, coordination, achieving agreed MBCO for each prioritized product or service so that when we go around the cycle each and every year, you can say, how did we achieve it? Did we have it? Yes, we should have a mechanism for the review and the approval for everything that we're doing. And by changing the name from business to resilience program and say that instead of just looking at it from business continuity, we're looking at the whole organization. Each and every one of us, whether we be in ICT service, whether it be in disaster recovery, business continuity, crisis management, or whatever, we're all talking the same language, we're all doing the same job, and we're going for that. So therefore, at every stage, we're looking at it. And don't forget the HR, because HR have got a very, very difficult job, especially during a disruptive incident. Look at your facilities, look at the impact on your environment, look outwards as well as inwards, but also talk to your suppliers and talk to your customers. Can they actually satisfy your program? And what is organizational resilience? Well, we're looking at ways and means to achieve an end. And that really is it. And if I take it from Andy Yoren, just last month, he gave 5 recommendations for the future of the security industry. But right down at the bottom, he said, categorize and prioritize assets. Understand what is mission critical to your organization. Isn't that what business continuity management practitioners have been doing for years, from the top down, from the organization and business requirements? And information security have been trying to do it from the other way around. Just as a little addendum to that, I don't know if any of you have seen the Ponemon Institute research, which was released yesterday. And it states there at the end that business continuity management plays an important role in reducing the cost of a data breach. And I advise people to get a read of that, because it does make some very, very good sense that business continuity, ICT service, cybersecurity, we don't operate in islands. We are all in the one place. So therefore, by building bigger fortresses, you don't enhance security. All that you're doing is you're putting up greater barriers to people from getting in. What happens if the threat is on the inside? Remember the fallout from Edward Snowden and his ill-judged leaks. It's made the information security business that much more difficult. Emphasis on early detection. If you can detect a threat before it materializes into something which is going to cause an impact and kill it, fine. Look at it, detection and containment over recovery. Look at honeypots. They're there. And from the military, I always say that in attack, you have to be lucky once. In defense, you have to be lucky all the time. And that's something that I don't think we will ever achieve. But an organization is dependent on the skills and ability of its people. And the people are the thing which is really, really important. It's people that write programs. It's people that devise processes. It's the people that devise procedures. And it's people that are going to drag your organization back into fully productive and effective delivery of products and services rather than technology. So therefore, I recommend that you rehearse the people time and time again in what they should be doing and exercise the plan. And organizational resilience, as a final thought, is a desirable outcome. And it's only measured when it's necessary to invoke all the plans and exercise the organizational leadership, because, unfortunately, it is the leaders who are going to drive the resilience. And leadership have got to look at it and see the way in which the organization is in a continual fight for those dollars. Resilience dollars are very, very valuable. And why should we have two organizations fighting each other for scarce resources? Let's combine, work to the benefit of each other, work to maximize our strengths and minimize our weaknesses, because that way we can. And sometimes it says there from Winston Churchill, however beautiful the strategy, you should sometimes look at the results. And Yo, your final thoughts?
Ian, I couldn't agree with you more. It's all about making sure that you've got not only the right strategy, but the right tactics to build the critical core competencies that you need from a program point of view, and bringing these silo stakeholders together, building a common language, a common approach, and then making sure that execution is as streamlined as it possibly can be and sort of driven into the operational fabric of the organization. So it is all about results, and we have a very dynamic environment in which we work, and times are just getting shorter and shorter, and approaches to risk management are becoming, less snapshot and more continuous. So we've got a ton of work ahead of us as professionals to pull these groups together.
And of course, the end result is when the incident does mature into a disruptive event, everybody should be able to just take the cup of tea and carry on and really work the continuity plans, knowing full well that every member of the organization is well rehearsed and able and is supplied with the tools, techniques, and the time to do their job effectively. And thank you very much indeed. And we're ready to take questions.
All right, wonderful. Again, if you do have any questions for our speakers here today, again, you can find the question panel on the right-hand side of your screen. We have a few came in already. First one, isn't it possible that a cyber event can be so severe that RTOs are no longer viable, and therefore the best thing we can do is keep the crisis management plan active until IT is able to address the issues to bring systems back online?
I can take that, and Ian, if you could add to it. That's absolutely right. One of the most devastating effects of a cyber breach can be that you've had compromised information that's been backed up for weeks or months and not even know it, that there could be corruption in the data. And so when you try to recover, you're really just recovering with information that is really of little value to the organization. You can also have a situation where the data has been corrupted due to an attack. If we look at what happened at Sony, for example, that was devastating for the company. And the cost of recovery is in the millions. No cyber insurance will cover it. in its entirety. And really, you're talking about returning to manual systems and building up processes from the ground up. So, yes, cyber attacks can be just as devastating as catastrophic events from Mother Nature that actually wipe out data with very little chance of recovery.
Yeah, there I can agree with you, because I have been in situations that have mirrored that. But as we say, if you've got a cyber attack which is so devastating that it wipes out your data to make it totally unusable, it's obviously that there was some form of deficiency, or the hacker, whoever it was, and the perpetrator of that attack, was able to breach the security defenses and almost carry on as though it's in a bunker busting situation. And the fallout from that would be absolutely catastrophic. But how would they know that the backup data had been compromised as well? If you've got adequate backups, but if you've got a Trojan inside your data that is quietly wiping away, it's one thing that your detection capability must be one of the priorities in there for the corporate dollars.
All right, next question here. What are the biggest obstacles to driving integration, specifically between BC and info security groups?
I think I touched on that one, and it is the constant competition for the corporate dollar. And but by looking at it as I've described it previously, that we can actually achieve far greater bang for the corporate buck by working together, rather than working in opposition to each other and saying that we have absolute priority to protect the data, whereas the business continuity people are saying, well, we're trying to protect the organization and the business. I think it's a case that the leadership of the organization has got to determine the priorities, and the priorities should be determined by looking at what is the priority and the impact of loss of data. It's a denial of access from whichever way you look at it. Denial of access of people, denial of access of machinery, denial of access to any facility. You can knock out a building quicker by denial of access to a continual supply of water before anything else. It's been proven time and time again.
I think that the biggest challenge is really terminology. It really is common risk models, figuring out what the definition of a risk is, an incident, an event. There's still a lot of debate and confusion about what constitutes an incident versus an event in security versus business continuity versus CR. The whole concept of escalation and, when do you invoke? At what point does crisis management get involved? At what point does HR or PR get involved?
Yeah.
What are the messages that go out in the case of an incident? So we really have a lot of work to do to kind of get compliant with the standards. The standards give us a great foundation on which to work, but every company has a different set of nomenclatures that they use, and it really is important to pull all this together and to at least provide a definition of what the taxonomies are, and then start mapping them, and then start agreeing to a set of master terminologies that everyone can sort of map into and understand what it means.
Yeah, and just as an addition there, as a quick rule of thumb, I look at the definitions of what an incident is. An incident is something which, when it happens, has a potential to. So an incident is the potential trigger, and if you can trigger your crisis response as soon as the incident is detected, when it becomes the disruptive event, you're already up and running and ready to work. Sometimes that the difference between detection of an incident and declaring that you've got a disruptive event can be a matter of seconds, but it's a matter of getting everybody up and running and operationally ready. The more that we can give the early warning, that we've got an incident which has got the potential to disrupt our business capability, the better. So sometimes it's, I don't want to cry wolf, but sometimes it's far better to stand the team to, and then be able to say, sorry people, they've done a great job, they've contained it, so therefore it's no problem, carry on.
Right, and stand down. Yeah, the other real important thing to remember here is that we're reaching out from the point of the disruption. We're reaching out prior to that and into protection and into more proactive analysis of the situation for early warning and for analysis like we see in the kill chain. So our models in business continuity and in business resilience, which is more or less the umbrella of all of this, are going to more and more include sensing of the external environment, getting some metrics and analytics running to do some predictive analytics, and also to take action to shut things down and to contain things before they become a real problem earlier on in the cycle.
Yeah, and not only that, as an addendum there, the one area which is an evolving science is this thing called horizon scanning, being able to get onto the horizon to see what's going to come, not only threats but also business opportunities. The farther the horizon extends, the more opportunities we will have to combat any disruption. But not only that, look at it that we can then position the organization's products and services to capitalize on it.
All right, wonderful. Any, there are several questions we did not get to here today. The speakers here today will have access to these questions and can follow up with you afterwards. But in essence of time, as many folks are jumping off to their next call, we'll wrap it up here today. So any parting words, Yo or Ian?
No, I think we've covered it. Thank you very much for attending, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you very much indeed for attending. And I think it's now cup of tea time.
Wonderful.
Yes, and carry on and stay calm.
There you go. Thanks a bunch.
Okay.
Thanks again, everyone, for their attendance here today. We again hope you've gathered some great information from today's webinar. DRJ would also like to thank Ian and Yo for their time here today, as well as Metric Stream for sponsoring today's webinar. We are recording this, and the link to the recording will be shared with you on a follow-up email coming out to you tomorrow. You may view the recording as frequently as you wish, or you may share it with your peers. If you do have any additional questions, please contact Disaster Recovery Journal. Thanks again, and this now ends today's webinar.